Well, I thought that an appropriate way to analyze Banjo-Kazooie would be to put pieces together as if it were a jigsaw puzzle. So I'm going to try and just not be very linear about this and just talk about whatever resonates with me at the moment. And the first thing that comes to mind is that you collect musical notes as a collectible item, and notes are for music, and they also are a form of notation. I mean, of course, they are a language. And as I've mentioned in other videos, I feel as if language is a big aspect of this game because Grunty speaks in rhymes. There's a lot of wordplay. But mainly I think it's the issue of Grunty and the importance language has in Grunty's character. This is funny then because Grunty's rhymes are essentially a song. I mean, they're a poem, right? Rhymes are something that are very intimately connected to music, I think, right? A rhyme makes something sound song-like. And so it feels as if the fact that you're collecting notes, and of course the fact that all of the characters are named as musical instruments, it may even connect to the fact that, Banjo and Kazooie enter through Grunty's mouth, and that's, as I said, where language comes from, but it's also where a lot of music comes from, right? If she were to play the kazoo, I mean, she would have to put the kazoo in her mouth and not the banjo, but, like there is a way in which maybe the characters entering into Grunty's body, Grunty's lair, and all of them kind of surrounding her, in a sense, in this big quest, their names being those of musical instruments. It feels as if not only is she saying things, she is singing things. She is conveying information through song. And that has such a deep shamanic ring to it, I feel. Because it seems as if she is not just saying things, but chanting them. Through this strong association to music that the game seems to have. So it feels as if in this game there is an aspect of shamanic chanting. And of course, there is a literal depiction of shamanic chanting in this game, because that's exactly what Mumbo Jumbo does. In order to transform you into different things, he needs to chant. And what does he do? He transforms you into different things, right? He changes your identity, which is exactly what Grunty desires. Her goal is to change herself. And so it's almost as if Banjo and Kazooie are going through that process in Grunty's name, right? Through some sort of shamanic process. Yeah, I don't know. So this whole process seems to begin on Spiral Mountain, which is a spiraling mountain that grows out of a river. Well, it's basically, it seems to at least visually emerge from the water. And so I can't help feeling that this somehow translates into the level design in some way. As if the levels were little dreams within Gruntilda, which somehow symbolically represent some of the core ideas of Spiral Mountain sometimes. For example, Treasure Trove Cove is also like a big, on the one hand, it's a big mountain-like structure that emerges from water, emerges from the sea, right? It's like a little, It's not a mountain exactly, it's sort of hollow, but it's a big sort of rock formation, which, and here is where the symbolic aspect enters into the thing, but it has a lighthouse on top. So, okay, on its own, a lighthouse isn't anything particular, but it is a tower symbol, right? Which kind of resonates mountain, spiral mountainy kind of thing of a tower that goes upwards, right? And the level is also, I think, filled with similar kind of images. On the one hand, we have a volcano in the middle of the sea, almost as if to echo the very same idea, which is a towering mountain jutting out of the water. And at the same time, we have a castle, a sand castle. And this may be a weaker kind of connection, but it's almost as if a castle is a tower in some sort of a medieval sense of the word, right? It's a fortress. And I am reminded, for example, of the fact that Grunty herself seems to at least have an appreciation for fortresses that jut up into the sky. In Banjo-Tooie, for example, I'm kind of going from memory here, but Grunty Industries, as its name suggests, seems to be owned by Grunty, or at least represents her in some way. And it is essentially a big kind of towering construction. Okay, I kind of checked now, and I realize I'm wrong. I meant Cauldron Keep, although Grunty Industries seem to be a nice sort of tower kind of building. It extends upwards more than it does horizontally, whatever that may imply. And Cauldron Keep kind of has the same feel to it. In fact, I am reminded of the quiz game that we play, also called Tower of Tragedy, right? Anyway, I guess all this just means to say that I get the feeling that in this game we are ascending upward in some way. Something is ascending upward from the water up. So something is ascending from the depths of the water up. I don't know if this means that something from the depths of the unconscious is rising up like an iceberg, or what else it could mean. But I do seem to perceive that pattern of towers. Of course, it's not really a Banjo-Kazooie thing. It's a kind of a trope in all sorts of fairy tales and cartoons and things like that. The villain tends to have a big towering fortress, right? So I think that in its fairy tale aspect, as someone like Marie-Louise von Franz maybe would say, that there is something about this structure that maybe points to some psychological thing, like, for example, precisely the idea that our shadow, that the villain, right, the part of ourselves that we don't identify with, is up in some sort of inaccessible space, up maybe meaning beyond the realm of everyday life or something like this. I'm not sure where to take it, but anyway, I mean, yeah, I think that maybe precisely the fact that it's a trope that we see in fairy tales gives a certain kind of strength to the way it is used in these video games. As in Donkey Kong Country 2 or whatever, right? This sort of the villain being up in the sky. There's something interesting about that. Because in fact, for example, in Donkey Kong Country 3, there is this weird switch where, yeah, K. Rool is in the highest area of the map visually, and I think also probably geographically. He's not on the top of the snowy mountain, but he's sort of on the top. He's on the highest level of water. You have to ascend all of the waterfalls in order to reach him. And yet there is a goodness that's above him, Queen Banana Bird. There is a way in which the villain or the shadow is towering up above us, but then there is a level even above it, which kind of envelops the villain, and redeems it in some way. Redeems it in the sense that it makes it makes the structure kind of work. It brings a sort of a goodness to the picture. Okay, I'm sorry for the complete stream of consciousness nature of this, but I think that maybe going with the jigsaw puzzle motif of Banjo-Kazooie is the only way that I feel able to even approach the game, because it does get very non-linear, I feel. And I think it gets non-linear enough that it starts symbolically intersecting with other Rareware games, which, if need be, I will do that. We can speak about all of them in one big kind of one big universe kind of way. Well, there is a thought about Queen Banana Bird that I would like to finish before moving on, because I think that this is part of an important structure here, that you ascend and you go up and up and up, and you reach the villain, and then you sort of go further up still, and you find like the flip side of the villain, like the other side of the coin. And I guess that's what I meant by it redeems the villain, because I think it gives wholeness to the villain. It sort of there is a way in which Queen Banana Bird is the opposite of K. Rool in a variety of ways. In one way, it's a bird in opposition to a reptile or a snake. So it's a creature from the sky, a creature from the earth, or even the water. There is Queen Banana Bird is female, K. Rool is male. There is sort of like a way in which the two of them I think that the differences between them are significant. And maybe trying to return to Banjo-Kazooie for a second, but comparing it to the Donkey Kong stuff. Donkey Kong Country 2, for instance, and, well, I think all of the Donkey Kong's countries begin by the water. They begin by the shore, and then you go up. In fact, a lot of them begin symbolically on a ship, as I try to talk about in the videos, that you start at a ship, and then you go up. So the ship is the starting point, almost as if you've sailed out into the sea of the unconscious or whatever, and then you're sort of going up, ascending it or something. Because that seems to be what's happening in Banjo-Kazooie at some level. We find in Treasure Trove Cove that the hippo character, Captain Blubber, whose ship has crashed and he's very sad, and then over the course of the games, he seems to get better and better ships. By the end of Banjo-Kazooie, he's, I think, riding some sort of wave racer type thing. And by the end of Banjo-Tooie, he's driving not a water ship, but a spaceship. So it's almost as if the type of ships have improved. We've started off with the crashed ship, and then it's gotten better and better. This is something that happens in Banjo. I mean, in Donkey Kong Country 2, in a certain sense, right? We started the crashed pirate ship. Well, yeah, we start at least at the pirate ship, go through an area where crashed pirate ships are shown, and then we go up and up towards a robot mechanized kind of ship, which seems to be like sort of an improvement if what you want is to fly up into the sky kind of thing. It even reminds you of a Metroid, the theme of, again, because there is a fairy tale aspect to these games. I think that certain themes get repeated again and again, as in fairy tales. And there is a thing in Metroid where, Samus crashes her ship, and the crashing of the ship seems to be simultaneous with the losing of all of her power-ups, as if the ship is her suit, in a sense. Crashing the ship means losing the entirety of your suit. And then by moving forward in the game, you rebuild your ship if your ship is your body, in a sense, or your body in a psychological sense, maybe, your identity, something like that. Which is what Grunty wants to do, right? Rebuild her identity. You start at the broken ship. You could almost say maybe that, again, from a psychological point of view, it's almost as if the broken ship is the awareness of the broken ship. That is, say, you begin the adventure by becoming aware that there is a problem. There is something you want to fix, and that problem is the broken ship. And that's where the adventure begins. And then you move forward. Samus gets all the power-ups, and then so yeah, it feels as if it almost reminds me of the sort of the Greek stories of Persephone or Inanna, or these figures that descend down into the underworld, and every time they descend deeper and deeper, they have to rid themselves of their clothes, of all of their jewelry, all of their clothes, their crown, right? So that the queen descends down, but by descending down needs to really, get rid of her suit, like Samus does. So it's almost as if the games begin at the point where you have descended into the underworld, and therefore you have surrendered all of your power-ups, and maybe even the awareness that you ever were a queen, right? In the sense, like, as in the Gnostic fables of the pearl and so on, that you are at some point aware of a certain, or let's say that there is a wholeness to yourself, but then it is, you lose that awareness, the awareness of that divinity, in a sense. And then it is a question of remembering it, as we do in Banjo-Kazooie, right? It's an issue of putting the pieces back together in some way. Remembering who you are. In a sense, Grunty's quest to become someone else, I think, is her own attempt at remembering who she is in some way. It's funny how this is such a trope in video games, right? Because you very often begin a video game without your power-ups. And then in certain types of games, right? In these kinds of adventure games, you, as in Banjo-Kazooie, right? You learn new abilities as you go on. And then by the end of the game, it's almost as if you have the complete set of ability and knowledge that those characters have. As if it is completely natural for Kazooie to fly, but she needs to learn that. It feels as if she needs to remember that in a Greek kind of remembering what you have forgotten kind of way. So it's funny then, because as a video game then, you, the player, are almost helping the character on the screen remember that they are a character on a screen, or something like that. At least in some of the Donkey Kong Country analyses and others, this theme of awareness and gnosis and stuff like that, it almost seems to pertain to the characters themselves, as if the game itself is becoming aware of itself as a game, and then you are partaking in that process, as if the game is kind of like a scrying mirror through which, or an alchemical vessel through which you are, exploring different states of awareness, remembering different things, experiencing different things, which get emulated in the game for you through these sort of fairy tale kind of arcs that repeat. So returning to Banjo-Kazooie, I feel as if it's not just Treasure Trove Cove that explores this idea of the ship, not even the broken ship, right? Because in some way we begin with Captain Blubber's broken ship, but we continue onto Rusty Bucket Bay, right? We will encounter a rusty ship. And I think rust here implies broken, derelict, something that is not in good shape, right? It's a broken ship in some way. So the Rusty Bucket seems to be kind of like Captain Blubber's ship in some way. This is where the game begins getting very non-linear, in my opinion, because when we start exploring certain aspects of the lore of this game, we remember that, for example, this game originally was going to be a pirate game. I think that's why there are so many ships and things. And Grunty was going to be Captain Black Eye. So that's why she owns a ship to begin with. But of course, then that sort of in the context of Banjo-Kazooie as it became, it's so beautiful how that still works, even visually, in just the silly detail that Grunty will lose an eye in Banjo-Tooie, right? She will become a one-eyed witch, which is what Captain Black Eye is, right? His name even refers to the lack of one eye. But of course, when you mix these like plot elements with a more non-linear dimension to it that I'm trying to think about, it gets strange because the plot is, it's funny, that's the thing with video games, the plot is linear in a certain way, but games aren't linear. You watch a playthrough of Banjo-Kazooie, and each playthrough is going to be different. People are going to move in different ways, talk to this character first instead of that character. There are different ways in which, within the linearity of the plot, games are very non-linear in comparison to movies, for example, and that makes symbolic analysis of them different. And in certain ways, much, much more expansive. So this whole broken ship thing, for example, it almost feels as if first we get Captain Blubber's broken ship, and then the next stage is Clanker, who is essentially a rusty submarine type thing. I mean, he's an animal, a creature, but he is made of metal. His design is reminiscent of a submarine, which is basically a ship. It's an underwater type of ship. It's a water vessel. And Clanker is rusty. It's a rusty water vessel, which we will then encounter in the rusty bucket itself. So it's as if the game is leading us from the broken ship to sort of different incarnations of the broken ship motif upwards through levels that seem to grow increasingly out of the water and up towards the sky. Right? We go from Clanker to the swamp. So in Clanker, the water is already pretty dirty and still. It almost feels as if. So we go. So let's say Treasure Trove Cove, Clanker, swamp. Right? I think that's how it goes. Yeah. And in those three, you can already see that the water is increasingly dirty, or still. Maybe dirty isn't the word, right? In Treasure Trove Cove, the water is moving, but then it almost feels, or at least I would speculate, that the crashing of the ship seems to stand symbolically for the stilling of the water, as if the ship represents motion on water. It almost as if it represented the motion of the water, of spirit, of psyche, whatever you want to say, right? So it's moving, but then we enter a kind of stillness, perhaps, some sort of a trauma or a complex that is entering into a loop, a repetitive habit, something like that. And so the water stills. And as it stills, it gets increasingly, dirty. And then in Bubble Gloop Swamp, it is so still that it becomes a swamp. But then what is a swamp? A swamp is a pond of life, right? The stillness of the water of a swamp is an opportunity for all sorts of life to emerge, as the level shows. And so then we move from swamp to mountains. Freezeezy Peak is a mountain. Gobi's Valley has... Okay, yeah, I'm kind of reading into this, but Gobi's Valley is it has a pyramid in it, which I find fairly evocative of a mountain motif. And so on, and we sort of move through. In any case, I'm kind of, thinking about this as I go, so it's not very carefully planned, but I feel as if, see, there is a way in which you can take the levels to be a linear progression from one stage to the next. It kind of moves through different stages of like psychological development or something. And at the same time, you can read it in a completely non-linear way in which Treasure Trove Cove could be non-linearly symbolizing aspects of Rusty Bucket Bay, and so on. One thing I will say about this linear reading of it, though, is how I find it fascinating that Rusty Bucket is right after Mad Monster Mansion. So, okay, perhaps I'm going to sort of lay out a pretty weird idea here, and who knows, maybe in future videos I will find ways of explaining it better. At the moment it's just a hunch, but I get the feeling that we have something very interesting happening in the sequence of the levels here, which is this sequence between Freezeezy Peak and Gobi's Valley, because they clearly zigzag each other in terms of temperature and symbolic element, right? One is ice, Freezeezy Peak, and Gobi's Valley is sun, sweltering sun. It's the absolute opposite of a freezing mountain. This is common in video games, again, this transition from really, really hot levels to really, really cold levels. But it's also typical of again, of myth, fairy tales, and these sort of steep transitions from one state to the next, which gives this a slightly almost like religious feel to it, I feel. Considering especially, and this is where I want to go with this, that Banjo-Tooie does the same. Banjo-Tooie kind of conglomerates this into one same world. Hailfire, peaks, right? So in that case, we have both peaks side by side as if they stood for a yin-yang kind of duality, right? The ice and the fire, the yang and the yin and the yang, or whatever, right? And sun and moon, and here in Banjo-Kazooie, it feels perhaps, and again, this is sort of just a hunch, which I just want to explore maybe, that Frizizi Peak and Gobi's Valley work together as Hailfire Peaks. I say that together they are symbolically the same thing as Hailfire Peaks. In fact, Bubble Gloop Swamp, brings to our attention two animals, a crocodile and a turtle. And they sit at opposite sides of the map, if I remember correctly. Yes, exactly. They're even facing each other with a sort of kind of like a cross between them, like four mounds between them. So they're just, obviously it's level design. It looks nice for it to be symmetrical like this. But I think the symmetry also lends it this sort of almost religious feel to it, right? We have these two animals facing each other. What comes into my head is that it almost as if the swamp is something where it's a place where life emerges out of the muck, out of the dirt, of death, right? Of still water, deathly kind of water. Then here we are almost in the presence of the reemergence of duality, of two opposing animals from a basic kind of goop. There is like an undivided goop, and it becomes divided, like the cell splits into two. Which is then, again, in this kind of loose reading of it, this is the area that precedes Frizizi Peak and Gobi's Valley, which are such sort of dual areas. We then move to Mad Monster Mansion, which, according to the paintings in the mansion, seems to be Captain Black Eye's mansion, or Grunty's mansion. So there is an association, obviously, between Captain Black Eye and Grunty and death, right? On the one hand, because she is a witch, so she's associated to death thematically. But the fact that Captain Black Eye as a character still is in the paintings here, I find fascinating, considering that this is the level that precedes Rusty Bucket Bay. Basically because I can't help feeling, and again, this is just another one of those weird hunches that I'm just going to propose. I'm just going to suggest this, and what you can think whatever you think. But a rusty bucket is like a dead bucket, and a bucket is an object used in the idiom, to kick the bucket. If you kick the bucket, you die. And here we have Mad Monster Mansion, the sort of death graveyard place, right before the ship, as if the ship, the dead ship, it's a rusty ship, so it's a dead ship. It's almost as if this is the ship that takes you to the other side, like the ship that takes you across the river Styx, as if, you die in Mad Monster Mansion, it's the graveyard, and what happens after death? Well, the ship takes you beyond the threshold, right? The dead ship, the rusty bucket, a ghost ship of some kind. And where does it take you to? It takes you to Click Clock Wood, which is sort of like it's the last area, and it is also, it seems to be about a transcendence of time, right? All four varieties of time can be experienced almost simultaneously, so that it feels as if this is the other world, right? The world beyond death, a world where time is no longer what it is in the mortal world, or something like that. Again, from a sort of fairy tale perspective, right? In a fairy tale kind of way, Click Clock Wood has an otherworldly feel to it precisely because of this transcendence of time. It feels almost like heaven, with this central tree, again, this towering tree in the middle, and your ability to move through time unaffected by it or something. So it could be that this ascent up a mountain, which is so characteristic of this and other games, is an ascent up the mountain towards timelessness. This at least corresponds to like the Buddhist idea of the mountain Meru, which is precisely, seems to be like a way to visually represent the act of ascending up towards the present moment, as if the center of the mountain, the tip of the mountain, is the center of time. Let's say that the present moment, being instead of doing, instead of the multiplicity of doing and time. And that therefore ascending up this mountain is, in other words, sort of entering into a deeper and deeper connection with being,